If you are currently trying to buy a house right now in the July 2023 housing market, you probably think it's never going to happen. You probably think this market is stressful, crazy, bananas, outrageous. How does anyone ever get a house? I've heard it all, and frankly, I agree. It's a super competitive time right now in order to buy a house. There's a ton of buyers out there looking, and there just isn't a lot of inventory. So supply and demand, it creates a very tough environment if you're looking to buy a house, especially here in the Cleveland area. So how the hell do you get an offer accepted and find a new home? Well, there's certain things you can do when you go to make your offer, okay? And you have to be a little bit more strategic right now than ever before when you're putting these offers together with your real estate agent. So it's important to sit down and come up with a solid plan that gives your offer a higher chance of getting accepted. So I'm going to go through 5 things you can do as a buyer to make your offer more attractive to a potential seller. And not all these things have to do with purchase price. Purchase price is important, but at the end of the day, a seller is going to accept an offer that makes them feel comfortable from a purchase price perspective, but also has the highest probability of closing, okay? You're not hired as a real estate agent to get a deal under contract. You're hired to make sure that deal closes. And so a seller and their agent are going to evaluate all offers and look at the terms and contingencies included in each offer, and they're going to pick the one that has the highest probability of closing and offers the greatest financial upside to that seller. So let's get into the 5 things you can do as a buyer to make your offer more attractive to a seller. Number 1 is look at your financing. So as a buyer, how are you paying for this house? Are you getting a mortgage or a loan from a bank or a local lender? Or are you paying cash? And honestly, if you have the opportunity or you have the ability, I should say, to pay cash for a house, I would strongly consider it. I've been a part of situations where my buyer offers more money against a competing offer, but the seller takes that competing offer because it's cash. So when you have a cash offer, usually you're able to do a few things. Number 1, there's no appraisal. So if you have cash, you are the bank. You control how much you want to pay. So there's no appraisal process. You don't have to worry about that contingency. Also, there is no elongated 30-day closing period where you're waiting on your loan to get approved. So a lot of times with a cash offer, you can close in as little as 2 weeks. You're just waiting on the title company to process the deed. So those are 2 big hurdles and 2 attractive points for a seller. If you are getting a loan or a mortgage, which is totally fine, you don't have to have cash in order to win in this current market. But if you are getting a loan, sit down with your real estate agent and talk to them about who you're planning on getting pre-approved and your loan through, okay? And I say this because a lot of houses you're gonna go and make an offer on, there's gonna be multiple offers on that house. And let's say it comes down to 2 offers, your offer and another offer. And the seller and their agent are looking at these offers and they're identical, except for there's a different lender on each offer. And offer number 1 has a big mainstream bank that is going to be giving the loan to that buyer. And this bank may or may not be known for delays in closing and poor communication and deals falling apart. And basically it's a 50-50 shot if this deal gets done because of that big mainstream bank. Or offer number 2 has a local lender that has a branch here in the Cleveland area, and they do a ton of business in the neighborhood that you're looking to buy. And this listing agent, in fact, has used that lender before, and they have great reviews, and they're known for clear communication and getting a deal done. That seller is probably going to take that local lender and select that offer. So again, just sit down with your real estate agent and tell them who you're planning on getting pre-approved for, because in a lot of situations, a listing agent will call the buyer's lender just to verify what type of buyer they are and get a feel for what type of lender that is and if the deal is going to get done, if they don't already know who that lender is. So like I said before, the seller is going to take the offer that has the highest probability of closing, and having a solid lender backing that buyer is going to give you a higher chance of that property closing and the higher chance that that offer gets accepted. All right, the second thing you can do as a buyer to make your offer more appealing to a seller is to try and accommodate the seller as best you can. And I'm not saying throw away all your negotiating power and just do anything and everything the seller says, but there are certain things that you may be able to do as a buyer that are important to the seller that maybe aren't a huge deal to you as the buyer. So what I mean by that is maybe you can accommodate their closing timeline. Maybe these specific sellers need an extended close because they're moving for work, but they don't have to move for another month and a half, and they don't want to get a hotel or an Airbnb after their house sells. So maybe they need a 60-day close instead of the traditional 30. And maybe that's something you're comfortable with as a buyer. Or maybe the current sellers need the proceeds from this current home sale to put down as a down payment and buy their next home. So if that's the case, maybe they need to close as soon as possible, and then they want to rent back in order to have the time to go find their next house, put a down payment in, and get it under contract before moving out of their current home. So in that situation, maybe as a buyer, you can write in the contract that you'll do close on X date, and then possession will be at a later time, and they can live there for free during that buffer in time. So something like that may be enough incentive for the seller to take your offer if another offer doesn't offer that. And then also something you can do, especially here in Cleveland Heights, University Heights, and Shaker, it revolves around point of sale. So on point of sale reports, oftentimes the violations that are listed are pretty minor kind of ticky-tack things like, fill in the mortar or on the front step bricks or something like that, or add a handrail here, or scrape and repaint, some of the chipping paint on the exterior. So some of these little things can be very difficult to get and hire somebody to come out and complete in a short period of time. And so maybe as a buyer, you say, hey, seller, we'll take care of the remaining items on the point of sale report, because after we close, usually you have 90 days to get those things done. And maybe they're not huge financial commitments, or maybe there's something you're comfortable doing yourself. So that might be a good option, is to look at that point of sale report and say, hey, we'll assume the remaining violations, and we'll commit to or accommodate your closing timeline. And those may be important enough things for those sellers that they go with your offer. So that's why it's really important for your real estate agent as a buyer to reach out to the listing agent. One of the first questions I always ask is, what's most important to the seller in order to get this deal done? And sometimes the most important thing is that they can close on the date they want to close on. And if it's easy for you as the buyer to do that, then go ahead and do it. And it may increase your chances of getting that offer accepted. All right, the third thing you can do to make your offer more attractive is revolving around earnest money. And I would always take this one on a situation by situation basis. So earnest money is also known as a good faith deposit. This is money that goes towards your down payment, but it's just submitted with the title company much earlier than the rest of your down payment. And so something you can do as a buyer is increase the amount of earnest money you're putting down. Traditionally, earnest money is about 1% of purchase price. So maybe as a buyer, you say, hey, we'll put down 5%, and this gets deposited usually within 4 days of a signed agreement. And what that does is it just shows the seller that you're serious. And it also gives you an opportunity as a buyer to have some skin in the game. So you have money that's put down in escrow well before all the other money is put down. And so, that could be an option. I always warn people that, most transactions, if something happens, during the inspection, or maybe your financing doesn't go through, something like that, usually the earnest money is going to come back to the buyer, but not in all situations. So some situations, the seller might fight that, and they try to keep that earnest money. And so that's one of the risks you run with increasing the amount of earnest money you're putting down. But if you're pretty confident in the house and in your lending and in the inspection process, maybe that's something you can do that shows the seller you're serious. And then with that earnest money and down payment amount that's written in your contract, I always like to have clients include a proof of funds statement. So maybe this could be a screenshot of your bank account, and it just says, it just shows that you have the funds plus some in order to get this thing done. And again, it's just giving the seller confidence that you're a legitimate buyer and that this deal is going to get done, because that's the most important thing, that we get to the closing table. All right, the fourth thing that you can do revolves around inspections. So I always recommend that buyers get a home inspection, but there are some things that you can write in your contract around that home inspection contingency that makes your offer more appealing to a seller. The first thing you can do is just waive your home inspection and not get a home inspection done. Again, it's not something I recommend doing, especially if you're purchasing, any house is a substantial financial commitment and substantial investment. So you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence as a buyer to make sure it's a solid home. But in some situations, maybe a buyer's comfortable waiving the inspection. Like I wrote an offer a few weeks ago where the house we made an offer on had completely updated electric, plumbing, the roof was brand new, the windows. And then on top of that, when we did our initial showing, my buyers have family members that are electricians and contractors. they walked through the house and everyone was pretty confident and comfortable with the work that was done, so much so that they just waived the inspection altogether. So that's one option. The second option is you could write in your contract that, hey, we're going to get a home inspection done, but it's take it or leave it. We're not going to ask you, seller, to fix anything. We're not going to ask for a price reduction, none of that. We'll either move forward after the inspection or we won't because we didn't like the items that came up. So that's another option. And then the third option under inspections, and this is probably the one I do the most frequently, is you can say, hey, we're going to do a home inspection. This offer is contingent on a home inspection, but we're not going to ask for any repairs or a reduction in purchase price or credit up to a certain dollar amount. And maybe that dollar amount is $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. What that does is it lets the sellers know, hey, we're not going to ask for little tiny things to be fixed, after the home inspection. We understand it's an older home. There's little things that are going to come up, but we're not going to be nitpicky about what we ask for. But we do want to cover ourselves in case there's any major expensive issues that pop up, and then we may need to negotiate or back out of the deal. So those are kind of three things you can do revolving around the inspection that may make it more appealing to a seller. But the last thing, number 5, that you can do to make your offer more appealing is to offer some sort of appraisal gap to the seller and include that addendum in your offer. So an appraisal is an opinion of value, and a lender is going to schedule and send out an appraiser to evaluate the property you're under contract on. And all the appraiser is doing is verifying that the purchase price for that home matches whatever their opinion of the value is. And so in the event that the appraised value comes back lower than the purchase price, you have what's called there's a gap, right? There's an appraisal gap, and that gap needs to either be filled by the buyer or the seller needs to lower the purchase price. Seller's probably not lowering the purchase price. So if you think it's a situation where an appraisal gap is needed, and this is a conversation you can have with your real estate agent, you can say, hey, as a buyer, in the event that the appraised value is less than the purchase price, we'll cover any gap necessary at closing to make sure that the net price matches the purchase price. Or you can set a number. So you say, hey, we'll cover an appraisal gap up to $20,000 or up to $30,000. And so you're not blindly committing to a number you don't know, but you can set the number and include that in your offer. So that's the last thing you can do is offer an appraisal gap of some sort in your offer. But ultimately, these 5 things give the seller confidence in your offer, and it increases the chances of them maybe being more comfortable with your offer because it has a higher probability of closing because of some of these factors that you've written in. So try those out the next time that you write an offer, or review those with your real estate agent. And if you got any questions about real estate, feel free to reach out. And if you need help here in the Cleveland area, check the description below. Feel free to call, text, or email us. We'll be happy to help out any way we can.